you think of cellular, you probably think about that mobile in your hand. 4G, 5G, that's what the carriers sell to you. And you need that bandwidth and speed with a smartphone to be able to talk, to send video, to upload and download all that data that your apps consume all at once. Then there's the cellular that's used by your vehicle, or your medical device, or your home alarm system. And increasingly, cellular is also being found in industrial control systems. These devices don't require much bandwidth, so the cellular cost is absorbed as part of the overall service. You don't even notice that a given device is even running cellular, and that's a problem. In a moment, I'll introduce you to a researcher who presented at DEF CON's IoT Village about how these cellular chips in our toys and in our gadgets can be used to open a back door into the back-end systems, like S3 buckets in the cloud. Sometimes that data isn't on the internet, so cellular, it's the only way to get at it. And of course, these cellular-enabled IoT devices, they're unprotected. This is a story of the secret life of cellular chips and why we need to mitigate against the unintended access that they provide. I'm Robert Vamosi. This is Error Code.
My name is Deral Heiland. I'm the principal security researcher at Rapid7 for IoT technology. Rapid7 is an organization that supplies tools and services to companies that need to have improved security within their environment.
I spoke with Deral at Black Hat USA 2024 in Las Vegas, Nevada, and at that time, Rapid7 released a report on cellular networks and how they can impact IoT, OT, and ICS.
So the purpose of the research paper around a lot of technical research papers I may do is to build that knowledge, a knowledge level that I think is lacking either in the security research community and including our teams. And in this case here, we kind of focused on cellular technology and IoT because we're starting to see a massive increase in cellular capability on IoT for backhaul, whether it's consumer grade goods or even medical technology. And we wanted to get our arms around that. What does that mean from a security standpoint? How do we engage it? How do we test it? And how do we leverage that during testing for security purposes?
We'll be hearing the term backhaul frequently, so let me clarify that from the start. The backhaul refers to the connection that transmits data from the wireless cell to the internet. In a telecom network with a hierarchical system, a backhaul includes the intermediate connections that connect the central or backbone network to smaller subnetworks at the outer edges of the network. So I'm wondering if Deral would agree that cellular is becoming ubiquitous in the sense that it's better to pass data than using Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or anything else.
In some devices it is. Obviously, if you want a field camera and you want to stick it out in the middle of the woods, what are your choices? Unless it's close to the house, the Wi-Fi is not going to work, or some service like that. You get into medical devices, someone's wearing something, they're going to be mobile. Same situation. Isolated technology where general line of sight for that type of comms may not be available. Cellular comes in handy. Of course, you can have things out in the middle of nowhere and cellular wouldn't work either. And then we're also seeing it as backups. So you see a backhaul. The most common that I've seen this on is home security systems. So what happens if your power goes down in your house or something affects your security system? Does it just quit working? No, it'll switch over to backhaul. So if the internet goes down, you can actually pay for a service to have cellular as the backhaul or cellular as the primary. So most home security systems that I've popped the hood on, you'll find cellular modules in there.
I'm wondering, are we talking about using deprecated cellular networks such as 2G and 3G technology?
The technologies that are coming out are, 3G, 4G, 5G. The old stuff's gone. It's new stuff, new capabilities. I think we're all aware that the FCC regulations on capturing cellular communication exist. It's something we shouldn't be doing. We can't see that communication legally, and if we do capture it, most of the time it's going to be encrypted.
So we've talked about them being in field cameras, we've talked about them being in a bunch of different things, but what would be something that's not obvious to us?
I'm not necessarily everybody, so everything's obvious to me. So think of a device, any IoT or embedded device that needs to communicate out that doesn't have a central point of use. That means it can be put anywhere or carried anywhere or is mobile, your phone, is going to have a cellular module in it. And that's the best way to describe it. I think any device someone can put in their pocket and take with them anywhere, no matter what it is, medical device, a camera, whatever, and it needs to communicate somewhere, it's going to be cellular.
And then let's further define cellular for the audience. When we think about our mobile phones, which communicate voice, video, and it's the whole 4G and 5G extra layers. In this case, we're talking about just data going back and forth.
So it can be voice. You think about, there was a project I did a number of years ago, and it was basically panic buttons that AP was using in Colombia, South America.
What Deral is talking about is a literal panic button that reporters with the Associated Press would carry in case they were abducted or otherwise found themselves in dangerous situations. Unfortunately, these panic devices were also found to be vulnerable to hacking.
That's a primary example of that. It has everything on it. Voice. You could actually make SMS messages. It used SMS for all of its communication over the cellular line. So children's watches, those smart watches you buy for children, and you can call them on it or you can track them. It's a GPS. It's cellular. All the GPS devices in existence, the one you hang on your dog, it's going to be cellular.
So that's a problem. These cellular chips come as a whole package with all the protocols intact. What varies then is the bandwidth, how it's registered to an access point name or APN, a configuration setting that allows a mobile device to connect to the carrier's cellular network and access the internet.
Yeah, everything should be there, fully functional. Once you registered, it starts working, starts communicating cellular. Now you get different, like I said, we mentioned in the paper, NB-IoT, which is usually lower bandwidth in the kilohertz range, single, not full duplex. Then we get into the LTE M1, M2 chip models. They're bigger. Those typically you can use those for voice. I've actually had a development board one time and put a SIM card in, it registered it out and started making voice calls from it. So those will handle voice with no problem. You can move video with them. Obviously the cameras can do video, audio, all that type of stuff. So it's a full gambit, everything from the simple GPS devices to children's watches that'll do SMS messages or voice in some cases. So it can move a lot of data, and it doesn't take a lot of bandwidth to move voice. It just doesn't. Our phones, but we're not just moving voice with these things. We're moving massive amounts of data, running dozens of apps at the same time that communicate out. And those eat up quite a bit of bandwidth. The more IoT ones, when you purchase the SIM modules or whatever you use on these things, you have a limited amount of bandwidth you want to use, or they get pricey. So you have a watch, you pay $9-10 a month for that. It's different than your phone. So it's not going to be able to do everything your phone can do. Just doesn't have the bandwidth that. And that's basically it. It varies from all these different devices, from moving basic telemetry, be a smaller chip, less capability, probably an NB-IoT chip, all the way up to moving images, audio, making SMS messages to, it doesn't take much for an SMS message. You can do that over NB-IoT also. To the higher end to move heavier graphic informations and videos and stuff like that in some of the camera systems.
So we might see some security scenarios where these things are not turned off. So it's designed to do telemetry, but you can also do voice and you can do all these other things natively.
Yeah, you may run into devices that may just be moving basic telemetry data, but they have the capability of doing much more.
Which in theory could all be compromised.
From a risk standpoint, I think as you get into mobile technology devices, children's watches, I think we did something a number of years ago on children's watches, the Associated Press on the panic button thing. That particular there, what I did was I basically pulled all the firmware off the device and went through and found undocumented commands. I went through their manual and found out that, hey, Associated Press, are you using these devices they gave you for your security? But if I know the phone number, I can send a single SMS message to wipe it, reconfigure it, and turn it into a remote tracking device and audio listening remote capability. And then they were like, well, then there was the concern, well, how do you get their phone number? Well, we know they're probably going to register all of them with the same service. So at that point, all we need to know is the phone number range. And I found an undocumented command where I could send an SMS message to it. And the SMS message the function wasn't implemented. But what it did was it kicked back an error message to me, basically fingerprinted as one of these devices. With enough information, I can fingerprint it as one of these devices. And that's a prime example of abuse, So when we start thinking about, children's watches, and there's like, oh my gosh, there's like hundreds of these, maybe even some personal tracking device that you have. I wouldn't say like a fitness band or anything like that, because that doesn't do cellular that I know of. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's ones out there that don't. Cellular communication, especially when you move in telemetry data, gets really cheap. I used to have a whole set of SIM modules that would work for NB-IoT and LTE-M1 in my lab that I purchased from AT&T. Since then, they shut down the service. I paid $30 a year for these fully functioning SIM modules to use in my lab for testing. And I had a limited amount of bandwidth, so I didn't go beyond that, because then they would just shut off its functionality. But it moved quite a bit of data in a given year. I just couldn't constantly pump graphics through it or anything like that, but I could easily run tests or even move some videos I used to make some SMS messages calls from these things. I made a couple voice calls through a development board just to test to see if I could do it.
So we might see some security scenarios where these things are not turned off. Like it's designed to do telemetry data, but it could also be doing voice as well.
Now, I did try with one of the things I did try with the camera was to try to make SMS messages through the camera. So, but it turned out that it was using a restricted functioned APN. So it wouldn't allow SMS capability. Right. So I actually rewrote the devices and pointed it to a valid APN and tried to get it to do that, another vendor APN, and it wouldn't even take the connection. So just quit working. But the list goes on and on.
Given the myriad of options with cellular chips, it must be hard to single out what's actually going on.
So how do we as researcher testers engage the technology to understand what is going out over that cellular communications? And the way we do it is we kind of focus on the cellular modules that are installed on the devices by interacting with them between their primary processor and the cellular module. Interchip communication analysis. That gives us the ability to capture this data, decode this data. From that, we can see all the authentication mechanisms that are in place, passwords, encryption, settings, keys, all of that key data, because often from the CPU to the cellular module, it is not encrypted. It also gives us the ability to actually engage the cellular module. Cellular modules use the old AT commands, the Hayes compatible, which are used in a lot of communication modules nowadays, not just cellular. And it gives us the ability to look at the vendor's AT command manuals, understand how this works, and engage the actual devices directly. For example, looking at a device that does a field camera. It was one of our test boxes that we used in our research. These field or trail cameras are out in the woods. They take pictures, the cellular backhaul. We're actually able to engage that cellular module directly, capture all of the authentication, see it passing data out to Amazon buckets, S3 buckets, all that type of stuff. We can see the keys, we can see the passwords, and then we can even talk to the module. We can send our own AT commands. For example, we engage in the talk that we're doing on Friday at DEF CON. It's an IoT talk. We actually will demo engaging the module and turn it into a port scanner. And it will actually go out over the internet and port scan a device for us. And we use sockets. So cellular modules have all these capabilities, communication. They do HTTP communications, MQTT communications, FTP functions, and they have open socket capability on a number of these devices. And by leveraging those, that gives us the ability to engage this device by man in the middle, the communications. Control the module. While the module is doing its job, it's still being a camera, it's still sending images out to the field, but we can talk to it and say, hey, open up a socket to this machine, to this port. Is it open? Is it not open? Based on error messages returned, and then go on to the next port. It's not the fastest in the world. This isn't like a rapid Nmap scan, but if we're looking at a technology that, let's say, is connected out in a more secure fashion, let's say it uses a private connection into the cloud or private communication line, and it's not directly on the internet. Now we have the ability as testers, when we're looking at the entire product's ecosystem, to actually engage what's behind the curtain. Now we can do port scans into that closed environment. We can find out what devices exist in that environment, what ports are open, and potentially use that cellular module to engage them at a higher level.
So there's a lot to unpack here. So you have these field cameras. They're out in remote areas, and they're connecting back to a base station. And from there, they connect to the corporate network. And then the Amazon cloud, where all the data is sitting. So Deral, with the field camera in his lab, he's potentially in the middle, and he's able to eavesdrop on this data communication, giving him remote access to the cloud.
Basically, looking at the cellular modules, there are two general types that are utilized in IoT technology. There is the LTE M1, M2 versions. These are higher bandwidth. They can go up to, 4 megabits per second communications. They'll actually carry voice, capable of carrying voice. And then you get into the NB-IoT ones, which are often lower speeds in the kilohertz range. You see those used for telemetry type data. But all of these devices have the ability to do communications from the primary CPU doing USB or UART communications. They usually won't use both. If it's just moving telemetry data, it will typically just be UART data, communications from the primary CPU. In the case of the actual camera device, it's using USB. So we can hook into USB in circuit and capture and sniff all that data. And at the same time, we can cut the runs on the circuit board, tap into the UART, and then we have full control at that point of the cellular module. And we could write, in this case, we actually wrote Python scripts to actually carry out the socket communications for us.
So you're going to need physical access because these devices have UART, which is the universal asynchronous receiver and transmitter, a hardware protocol that sends and receives data over wires. And they also have USB. So these are not remote attacks.
Yes, physical contact with the device. These will not be remote attacks. I think what it gives us, it starts getting us thinking about the overall ecosystem. So when we're going to test a device or technology, it's often common for a number of people get hung up. It's a physical device, and it's a single device, but it has an entire ecosystem. It can have the back-end cloud services, other services, database services in the cloud, all kinds of functionality. And then it may also have some other mobile application for control the device and stuff like that. So when we look at testing, we want to look at that whole ecosystem. So even though we have physical access to the device, we have remote access to the cloud stuff now.
Ouch. Now you have a very large attack surface with thousands of these cameras out in the field. So I could grab one of those cameras and take it back to my workshop and connect through the USB port.
Potentially get into the back-end systems. And it gives us as researchers and testers, now obviously as testers, company hires us to test a device, to do that type of stuff outside of the realm of an NDA with a customer is wrong in every way, shape, or form. We would never do that. But if we're hired to actually test a product, we want to test the entire ecosystem. And the only way to, in my opinion, to completely do that test legitimately is we need to take into consideration all of the pieces of that ecosystem. And we can use the device in the middle to go, hey, let's say it's using over a private APN and it's connecting out through a VPN into a private cloud system at that organization. I can't attack that from the internet. And I can't test it from the internet. The only way to test it is through that device. This gives us the ability to do that, or potentially do that.
So what can you see in the cloud?
So that's still a question to be figured out, because my research has not been a customer-based research. So the next phase is, let's take the knowledge we built, let's put this into a real engagement where we have authorization to target those systems, and let's take it to the next level and build that knowledge base. I think I can get access to everything. That's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, start with, so every device, let's say there's thousands of these devices. So all 1,000 of these devices connect into that same back-end services. Now, are they isolated once they hit that back-end service between each device, like a private VLAN per device? I've seen that in some technology implemented. The thing is, let's figure that out. What's shared across all these devices? So if it happens to be some service function database that's shared across that, then we can start testing the standard net pen test stuff via the device. It's shared. Is it weak? Are we making the security weak because we're assuming this is all machine-to-machine comms and no evil person's going to get to those because they're isolated through a secure connection to the back-end system? My answer is no. And if we're doing that, then that's going to be flawed. And we need to figure that out so we can improve the overall ecosystem security.
So we talked about field cameras in the woods, but there are more critical systems that are designed similarly.
Medical. Let's say you attach, I have sitting at home a blood pressure cuff that I have not tested yet. It is purely cellular-based back-end communication. That's a prime example. So let's say this is all private and secured and completely controlled in their like closed little loop. I'm in the device. What can I see at that point? Are there weaknesses that are sitting back there because there was an assumption of security because of that isolation? And if that's the case, then we could compromise HIPAA data, PII data. The list goes on and on. A potential further compromise. And the only way to do that is to take this research to that next level. Let's apply this to our testing engagements and help that customer resolve those security issues if they exist.
So we talked about field cameras in the woods, but there are more critical systems that are designed similarly.
Yes. Yeah. When you get into industrial environments, it's common to, especially from telemetry data, and once you start getting into pressure sensors and gauges and in things like maybe on a pipeline or that aren't in direct wired capability, sometimes it may make sense to go cellular on some of those. I have not tested or looked at any of that tech. That's often a little harder to get, a little more on the more pricier side. And obviously, trying to get them to say, hey, Deral, here, have this, is not always going to be easy either, unless we're doing a test for them. Think about your cars. All the cars have cellular backhaul. All the new technology cars have cellular backhaul into those services. What does that mean? Can I open up the car hood and get in there and do what I did here and gain access to that communications? I have to say, yes, I probably can if someone's willing to give me a car. But I think it's doable. So in the paper, we go into a number of things. We talk about the AT commands, what they mean. The thing we found out is a lot of the cellular modules, all of the cellular modules are very similar in the USB and UART communications.
These cellular chips, they're very basic. You can talk to them using Hayes AT command sets. You remember those from the early days of the internet.
There's an AT command on almost all of the vendors where you can query it, and it'll give you a list of all the AT commands that exist on the chip. The thing is it's not accurate whatsoever. So we decided to solve that problem by taking all of the vendors' AT manuals, compiling a list of all of the AT commands that exist, and then writing a script to actually fuzz the module by actually sending a request to it that basically responds back if the command's valid with its syntax. And now we can go through, and the devices we were looking at, we go, hey, we're looking at the manual, there's no socket capabilities on this. Well, let's test it. And when we tested, we found out, yeah, there is. This module has all HTTP, it has general sockets, it has MQTT capability. And we figured it would be because it was the higher end chip, but it wasn't documented. But now we fuzz it, we get this information off the chip. Now we know all the commands that we can actually run against the device or potentially run against the device.
Okay, I thought AT commands were standardized.
There's a certain subset of AT commands that are standardized, but then each vendor has certain features or functions that they may want to implement that they implement via the AT commands.
So this is kind of like an onboard diagnostics port on a vehicle today, the OBD2, where you can talk to the ECUs directly. You've got these 6 pins which are designed to read the ECU communications off the CAN bus. But how the vendor interprets those 6 pins, well, it's up to the OEM.
Exactly. So there's literally no limit to what you can make in the device and create an AT command for that functionality.
So Deral and his team found a way to fuzz it and to confirm what it's doing and what they were seeing.
Basically a simple script, an AT command that says, and so there's AT commands that you can send to configure the AT, that particular function. There's AT commands that'll actually retrieve the data that's actually set already by the previous AT commands. And then there's commands that just tell you what the syntax is for the AT command. That's typically the 3 parts of an AT command's usage. And we just wrote scripts for all 3 of them to be able to dump data in there, totally randomly just put data in there to see what happens. AT commands that will actually go through and dump all the existing settings that are allowed to be retrieved. One of the commands we found, because every time we dig deeper, we're finding more. We find an AT command. I'm like, what's this do? And then we go off and find there's a whole manual on just the one AT command. So we use that, and we could do things like, what about services? When the chip starts up, does it have internal web services enabled? Does it have wide area network services enabled? So we can query it and say, give us a status, and it'll tell us whether those services are started up during the boot of the chip. And the list goes on and on. Every time we dig in, we find more and more, and it's just amazing.
So how many chip makers are in this space?
Oh, there's a number of manufacturers out there, quite a few. A lot of the big names. You see mostly the big names, but there are some odd ones. Every once in a while, we'll actually open up a device, and they basically have turned around and Qualcomm's the most common chipsets. So if you take any of these modules and take them apart, you're going to find Qualcomm under the hood. But every once in a while, we'll go into a device, and there won't be a module in there. Someone will have built their own cellular right on the circuit board by putting all the appropriate chipsets on there to do that.
So is this regulated in any way? Is there any form of standardization around cellular connection?
Obviously, any kind of cellular communication is going to be regulated. So what that chip does and the frequency range and how it communicates is all going to be regulated. I do not know those regulations, so I can't speak to those. My goal is to stay out of the area that involves me impacting or anything related to the regulations. And that's why we don't get into or have not got into capturing any cellular comms during this research. It's all based interchip communications. Let's tap into the interchips between the CPUs, between the 2 devices, and let's see what they're saying, and let's talk to them.
So I could create a rogue cell.
Well, it still has to connect to somebody. So it has to connect to either a public or private APN out there. So it has to connect to one of them. it would have to be set up. It has to be allowed to register itself to be able to actually pass data and things like that.
So this would be of limited use. No use if you can't register it with a functioning APN.
You buy a device just like your phone. You have to register. It has to be registered. You have to get all the appropriate pieces and parts in place, pay your money, whatever it takes, and it connects out and it actually functions. So the device I had, I actually kept it completely not registered until I solved the interchip communication with USB. And we had to hunt around and find a vendor that could support that. I'm not going to say who that is right now, but interchip sniffing a USB is difficult because it's very high speed. For high speed interchip communications is 480 megabits per second. So it's pretty you can't go buy a cheap sniffer and plug it in there and capture that data. You can't even buy an expensive sniffer and do that. Yes, it would be high-end equipment, but there's manufacturers that produce specifically USB sniffers, and I hunted around until I found one that would allow you to tap into interchips. Most of them are pass-through. So you hook the device in line with the USB, and then you can see all the data. I finally found one after looking for a while that allows me to connect right into the board and connect to the high-speed interchip comms and sniff it. And I talk about that in the paper, and I do mention it in the paper because they're literally the only one I've been able to find so far.
So I'm wondering, is there like a Shodan for cellular registries?
I have not found a Shodan type of thing out there. Not that I've looked. I mean, there's like when you start thinking of standard Wi-Fi, there's Wiggle that people go to, which comes in really handy. I don't think there's anything like that here, but I've not looked. Or a list. I mean, you can go out and find a list of APNs. Right. So you can go out and identify those across the country, and then there's a lot of private APNs that may not be in that list. So
in previous episodes of Errorcode, I've talked about how you can strip down a chip and you can see how the programming works on a physical level. Daryl's saying you can actually see it under there using cellular.
One of the things I like to at least make note, in the paper, we talk about a lot of the physical aspects of the device, trying to map out how the circuit's hooked up, how the chip's there, because for me to gain access, you need to find this stuff on the board, you need to find these communication lines. That data is across the board, whether it's a cellular or where you're working for a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, the same techniques work. And I always like to point that out. This is like nothing new for cellular. And one of the things we talk about is like with the board, we'll take a picture of both sides of the board, flip them, and then transpose them so you can see all the chips and all the components in one picture from both sides. And then overlay like the US or the cellular layout for the chip, the pin layout for the chip on their top. And then we can instantly look at this and go, okay, we know that USB is here. We know UART is here. Where's that in close proximity to other components on the board? Makes it easier for tracing things out. And that works across no matter what hardware you're, and it's a great technique. And then we did the one thing everyone got kind of excited about when I did it was like, so we start looking at smaller cellular modules. In cellular modules, the land grid array, most of the core connections are around the outer edge. And so what we did was like, hey, what if they've connected everything in a sublayer of the board? Do I have to cut through the board to get access to that? How do we do this? And I found out if I tilt the board on edge and put it under magnification, I can actually see some of the land grid arrays up underneath the board. And we use acupuncture needles, inserting acupuncture needles under the chip body to gain access to those. And it worked pretty good.
So how small are these cellular chips?
Most of them pretty good size. Most of them pretty good size. They're almost like a daughter board type thing. They're an entire circuit board themselves. They're packed dirty tight, but they're a small circuit board, and they're anywhere from like the size of I think the smallest is like a nickel or a quarter, all the way up to a 50-cent piece for some of the bigger ones. That's the best way to describe them in size. Yeah, you can see underneath the edge of the board, and the smaller NB-IoT chips often are usually a little physical smaller. At least that's what I've noticed. That the actual land grid arrays are within like 0.2 to zero point 0.5 millimeters underneath the edge of the chipboard, basically making it possible to insert acupuncture needles. We tried it on the larger ones. The larger chips have a tendency to cup when they're applied to the board, so that gap's closed down to the point. So if there's any gap between that board and the main circuit board, you can put acupuncture needles. Because even on the bigger chips, you're only about 2 millimeters to 3 millimeters away from the edge, which is pretty close. And you can easily get, if there's any gap there, a small acupuncture needle up underneath there to engage the board.
So a vendor threat model is that somebody could have a physical access to a device and wouldn't necessarily know what to do if they had that physical access. But here's the case where they can get into the cloud.
I believe that may be the case. And there's a number of things from a mitigation standpoint that vendors can do. So I'm into this device and I'm actually capturing via the USB all the authentication, all the passwords, the keys, everything that's used in the log into that back-end system. That's being passed from the CPU to the cellular module. A number of cellular modules have the capability of secure file systems. That means you could write a file on there. Unless I know the name of the file, I can't get it. There's nothing that says you can't move all that configuration data into that. And instantly you start reducing the risk, raising the complexity. At that point, a hacker's going to have to take the cellular module. He's going to have to figure out how to get access to that. He's going to have to pull the memory chips. He's going to have to gain access to the memory chips. Then he's going to have to reverse engineer it to find it. So the complexity goes up. And of course, it's security by obscurity, but the number of people that can actually carry out those level attacks goes down quickly.
So I'm wondering what other insights Deral has from the paper.
So I literally have just scratched the surface here, in my opinion. There's way much more research that needs to be done from a security standpoint and what this actually means, or potentially impact other devices and other technology that utilize cellular.
I'd like to thank Deral for coming on the show and talking about the secret life of cellular chips and why we need to mitigate against unintended access that they provide. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Join us on Discord. Search for Error Code Podcast to join the server, or go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up, including hacking critical infrastructure. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.